Have you ever looked at your own financial life and wondered whether you are ahead of the pack, behind the pack, or just floating somewhere in a fog of bad comparisons? Maybe you are lying awake at night thinking about your bank balance, trying to guess whether other people your age have more saved than you do. Maybe you open social media and see vacations, kitchen remodels, new cars, engagement rings, rooftop cocktails, and enough staged prosperity to make you wonder whether everyone else got a different set of instructions for adulthood. I have spent enough time around money to tell you something very simple. Most people have no idea what normal looks like, and that is dangerous, because if you do not know what average looks like, you cannot tell whether average is safe, whether average is broken, or whether average is exactly the outcome you should be trying to avoid. That is why I like looking at the actual numbers. Not because I worship averages. I do not. Average is not a moral target. Average is not a financial strategy, but average is a revealing mirror. And once you look into it honestly, you discover something uncomfortable. The average person is not doing well enough to copy. That is the lesson, not to judge, to wake up. Let us begin with income, because that is where almost every financial story starts. The median full-time worker in America now earns about $1,235 a week, which annualizes to roughly $64,000 before taxes. That is not household income. That is the middle full-time worker biweekly earnings. Half make more, half make less. That is the center of the labor market. And if you are looking at that number and thinking it sounds bigger than it feels, you are already learning the first lesson. Money teaches adults. Gross income is a flattering liar. Once federal taxes, payroll taxes, state taxes where applicable, insurance, and the quiet fees of staying alive get finished with it, the heroic-sounding number begins shrinking into something much more ordinary. That is the first gap. The gap between what people say they make and what their lives can actually do with it. Now, if income were the only piece of the puzzle, the conversation would be simpler. But income only tells you what enters the machine. It tells you nothing about what the machine leaks. That is why retirement savings matter so much. And here is where the average picture gets ugly. The most recent Federal Reserve survey still shows that a meaningful share of Americans have no retirement account at all. Zero. Nothing. Number 401k. No IRA. No rollover balance. No little pile waiting in the background while they work. And among those who do have retirement savings, the median family balance is only around $87,000 by the latest SEF-based summaries. Think about that for a moment. The median retirement savings figure across the people who are actually in the game is not some magnificent war chest. It is a number that sounds tolerable until you ask what it has to do. That is the second gap, the gap between having something and having enough. People hear $80-something thousand and think that sounds serious. It is serious if you are buying a pickup truck. It is not serious if you are trying to fund 20 or 30 years in which your body is older, your medical bills are higher, and your paycheck is gone. People love the 4% rule because it gives them a tidy sentence. Fine, use it. But then use it honestly. 4% of $87,000 is about $3,480 a year. That is roughly $290 a month, not on top of a giant pension, not as a rich person extra, but as the implied sustainable draw from the median retirement balance. You do not need a complex Monte Carlo simulation to see the problem. No retired life in America is meaningfully saved by $290 a month. That means the median account is not a retirement plan. It is a supplement, a very thin supplement. And that brings us to Social Security, which too many people treat either as a joke or as a miracle. It is neither as of early 2026. The average monthly Social Security retirement benefit is about $2,071. That is not $10 million matters. It can keep a lot of older Americans from falling through the floor, but it was never designed to deliver a prosperous retirement by itself. For most people, it is a base, not a fortress. And if the base is paired with tiny personal savings, the picture becomes obvious very quickly. Now let us move from what people earn and save to what they actually spend, because this is where all the pretty intentions get mugged. The average U.S. household now spends about $78,535 a year, or roughly $6,545 a month. Housing alone averages about $2,189 a month. Transportation takes another $1,110. That means those two categories by themselves eat about half of total household spending before food, healthcare, insurance, childcare, debt service, subscriptions, birthdays, school fees, and every other recurring little toll booth in modern life has even had a turn. That is the third gap, the gap between ordinary income and ordinary cost. People still imagine middle-class life with numbers from a cheaper era. They picture housing as manageable, transportation as routine, groceries as annoying but survivable. And the rest is something discipline can tidy up. But when the baseline household is already spending more than $6,500 a month, the room for error is much smaller than most people realize. This is why so many households feel exhausted even when they are not technically poor. The numbers do not need a dramatic collapse to produce chronic stress. They only need to stay structurally misaligned long enough. Now let us talk about credit, because this is the part where people either prove they understand modern money or expose that they are only managing appearances. The average FICO score in America is about 713. That is not elite, but it is respectable. It means the middle borrower is functioning well enough to stay inside the good range. Bills are generally getting paid. Limits are not being abused to the point of total ruin. Lenders still view the average person as a usable customer. That sounds encouraging, until you remember what a credit score actually measures. A credit score does not measure wealth. It does not measure peace. It does not measure whether someone is building a future that makes sense. It measures whether the debt system currently finds them cooperative. A man can have a decent credit score and still be broke. A household can have a 713 FICO and still be financing groceries through float rolling car notes and wondering why every month feels like a hostage situation with nice branding. That is why I care much more about debt than score, and the average American still carries plenty of it. Credit card balances alone are a catastrophe masquerading as convenience. Recent 2026 summaries put average credit card debt around $6,700 per American and over $11,500 per each household that carries it by some framing. However you prefer to count it, the message does not change. A huge number of people are living with debt that compounds faster than their investments, faster than their savings, and often faster than their emotional maturity. That is the fourth gap, the gap between looking normal and bleeding quietly. Credit card debt is one of the cruelest products in consumer finance because the first swipe feels harmless and the long tail feels abstract. A dinner, a flight, a couch, school clothes, a car repair, a birthday, a trip to the dentist, a moment of weakness online. All of it feels survivable at the point of purchase. Then the interest starts doing the thing interest does when it works against you instead of for you. Suddenly, the ordinary person is carrying a balance that extracts thousands a year in tribute from future earnings. And yet people still ask me whether they should buy some speculative stock while paying 20% on a card. Number, you should buy back your freedom from the card company first. Now let us step back and look at the one number that really tells the truth when income, savings, debt, and assets all stop arguing and get reduced to a single ledger: net worth. The median household net worth in the United States is now roughly $192,000, according to the latest Federal Reserve survey. That number sounds stronger than a lot of the others we have discussed, and in one sense it is. But again, context matters. Household net worth is not a bank balance. It includes home equity, retirement accounts, vehicles, checking, savings, brokerage assets, and anything else on the asset side minus debts. A lot of that worth is not liquid. A lot of it cannot be spent without consequences. A lot of it sits inside a house people cannot comfortably leave or a retirement account they are not ready to touch. That is the fifth gap, the gap between being worth something and being able to use it. A household can have a respectable net worth and still have terrible cash flow. A family can live in a house with equity and still feel trapped every month. A person can look solid on paper and still be one broken HVAC unit away from a credit card spiral. That is why I always say net worth is a good scoreboard, but a poor source of emotional comfort unless the rest of the machine is working too. Now I want to talk about the savings rate, because this is where the average person most clearly confesses what the future means to them. The U.S. personal saving rate recently has been hovering around 4% to 4.5% of disposable income, not 10%, not 15%, and certainly not the kind of rate that gives most people a realistic shot at escaping average outcomes. 4% means that after taxes and spending, the average person is leaving only a sliver behind for every version of tomorrow: down payment, emergency fund, retirement, car replacement, career change, business attempt. All of it must somehow be fed from that thin remainder. This is where everything we have talked about snaps into focus. The average person is not poor because he lacks character. He is not doomed because he never read the right money book. He is caught inside a machine where moderate income, high costs, thin savings, insufficient retirement balances, respectable, but not transformative credit behavior, and ordinary debt create a life that looks stable from 10 feet away and fragile from 2 feet away. That is why I do not want you using average as a comfort blanket. Average is not where I would ever want you to aim. Average is useful because it tells you what the center of the crowd is doing. And then you get to ask the right question. Do I want the result the crowd is getting? If the average worker earns a decent-sounding paycheck that shrinks badly after taxes, if the average household spends almost all of what it brings in, if the average retirement account is nowhere near sufficient, if the average person relies heavily on Social Security, if the average saver keeps only 4% after tax, and if average debt remains heavy enough to distort behavior, then average is not a safe harbor. It is a warning that should not depress you. It should clarify things, because the good news hidden inside ugly averages is that doing a little better than average in several categories compounds into a radically different life. Save a bit more than 4%, carry less debt than the crowd, build a real emergency fund, refuse to normalize credit card balances. Invest consistently while everyone else waits for motivation. Treat your credit score as a hygiene factor, not as a sign of wealth. Raise your savings rate every time your income rises, instead of letting lifestyle absorb the gain. That does not sound glamorous. Good. Glamour is usually where money goes to die. Wealth is usually built in the places that do not photograph well. Smaller recurring costs, automatic transfers, boring index funds, saying no before anyone claps, driving the car longer, living below the level your paycheck tries to talk you into. Choosing enough over display. That is how you beat average, not through brilliance. Through repeated refusal to live the way average people live. And I want to end with the thing I think matters most. A lot of people watch numbers like these and either feel superior or ashamed. Both reactions are mostly useless. The right reaction is orientation. If you are already ahead of these averages in one or two categories, good, do not get sleepy. Build the rest. If you are behind in one or two categories, good. Now you know where the hole is. The point is not to worship benchmarks. The point is to stop drifting, because once you see what normal actually looks like, you can finally decide whether you want to participate in it. I would not, and I do not think you should either.